Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. If you're new here, please subscribe. I'd really love that. If you're returning, how are you today? In today's video, we're going to be continuing with We Had Everything But Money. The year was 1930. The Depression was rampant, and we were having pea soup for supper again. For the fourth day in a row, I wondered where my mother had found a steel pot that big. All of us kids were grumbling and griping, and Mother replied that the soup improved with each passing day. I sneezed in disbelief. "It's the truth," my mother said firmly. My oldest brother, then 14, was the breadwinner of the family, and he seemed just as dejected with this meal as the rest of us. He seemed deep in thought, as though he was searching for a solution to our food problem. On days when we didn't have pea soup, it was boiled rice with sugar and milk. Suddenly, he produced the 50 cents he had earned shining shoes that day and asked if he could withhold it. He had a plan, he said, that would more than triple that amount. My mother was skeptical. How could she part with 50 cents? Although my brother didn't explain his scheme, he eased her fears, for she allowed him to pocket the 5 dimes. When my brother left the house later that evening, I sneaked out and followed him. He headed for the candy store and bought 25 copies of the next morning's newspaper at 2 cents each. Then he scrounged around for a large apple box and headed for the theater a short distance away. So he planned to sell newspapers? But what was he going to do with that huge box? I'd hid near the theater and watched as the audience slowly began filing out. Just then my brother stood up on his box and waved his arms and said in a loud, clear voice, "Step right up, ladies and gentlemen, for the greatest show you'll see tonight." The large group of theater-goers approached him, looking quite jolly. His eyes widened as I saw my brother leaped into a tap dance routine he taught himself. I thought he was every bit as good as Fred Astaire. My brother's audience was very receptive and everyone applauded. Before they began to walk away, however, he jumped from the box, grappled with the newspapers he had hidden behind it, and shouted enthusiastically, "Buy a paper! Buy a paper!" The happy throng couldn't resist, and in a few moments he sold every paper, not for 2 cents, but for 10 cents. A few generous patrons even rewarded him with a quarter. The next night, it was clear his plan had worked. Mother fixed us a juicy leg of lamb with all the trimmings. We ate with zest, thankful for our brother's ingenuity, and thankful that the pea soup would be saved for another day. In their fight to cut costs during the Depression, restaurants, hash houses, and other lunch counters asked customers to use less sugar, and often stretched the coffee by watering it down and adding chicory. Some businesses displayed signs that said, "Don't complain about the coffee. You may be old and weak yourself someday." Those businesses also contributed a few picturesque and even bizarre terms for food and beverages. The menus of the time often referred to eggs as cacklers, donuts as sinkers, seltzers as belchwater, and milk as moo juice. If you heard a waitress talk about wrecking a pear, she was ordering scrambled eggs. Marvin Dodson, Hendersonville, North Carolina. Today, nutritionists say we should choose low-fat, high-fiber diets. 60 years ago, my family had no choice. That's how we survived. My father could not find work the entire year of 1932, and he was too proud to go on relief. He borrowed against his insurance policy to keep us from losing our house, and he used his savings to buy us flour, spaghetti, and dry beans. The spaghetti came in wooden boxes containing 25 pounds, and the flour in 25-pound cloth sacks. My father planted several hundred tomato plants in our garden and in the empty lot next door. My mother canned more than 100 quarts of tomato sauce, and we had spaghetti with meatless sauce as our main dish at least 4 times a week. On the other days, we had spaghetti with garlic and oil or spaghetti with beans. But my father and I didn't mind. Spaghetti was our favorite, and we'd gladly pass up a steak for it. When I served in the Navy during World War II, the dish I missed most was my mother's spaghetti. Michael Lasevita, Youngstown, Ohio. My parents came to America from Foggia, Italy. And after the Depression began, they had hit the biggest garden in Quincy, Massachusetts. Almost everything we ate and drank was homemade. My mother was always busy canning fruits and vegetables for winter, and she made her own dough for crusty Italian bread. We also made our own Italian pork sausage with fennel seeds. Mother made her own pasta using a machine my father had made that looked like a square guitar. Thin strips of dough were laid on top of copper wire and then flattened out with a rolling pin so they dropped onto the wax paper below. They were the greatest strands of golden spaghetti you ever tasted. Another special treat was when my father and his friends went to nearby Walston Beach to dig clams. They'd bring back enough to feed us for a whole week. We'd feast on mussels, quahogs, razor clams, periwinkles. That's were small snails. We had baked stuffed clams on the half-shell, chowders and stews, plenty of clam juice for linguine. For school lunches, my mother would make my favorite, dandelion sandwiches on fresh baked bread. After the dandelions had been cleaned and boiled, she'd squeeze out the juice and fry the greens in olive oil, seasonings, salt, and hot red pepper. We'd save the juice, too, and drank it like a hot soup with a dash of olive oil and salt. A favorite noon meal was crushed garden tomatoes mixed with a little bit of olive oil, water, Italian herbs, salt, and pepper, and spread over bread. When we'd finish, we'd soak up the rest of the juices with more bread until there was nothing left on the plate. My father loved a dish of spinach, seasonings, and boiled potatoes with stale bread dipped in the juices. That was a meal fit for a king. Polenta fed many hungry families during the Depression, too. It's Italian-style cornmeal, which we ate either plain or covered with tomato sauce. My favorite food is polenta, too. I make it all the time, just to let you know. Our parents showed us the meaning of life and the importance of family during those tough times, and we've been on the track ever since. I wouldn't have traded places with anyone. My wife and I are now blessed with 4 daughters, and they and their husbands and children have given us more good reasons for living and loving than they'll ever know. Looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. After all, how lucky can you get? If you don't know, count the labor. Many of us who lived in the rural South during the Depression enjoyed delicious beverages for free. Most farmers had at least a few apple trees. After the apples were picked for pies, canning, and winter storage, there were usually many culls, bruised, oddly shaped, or slightly wormy of apples. That's funny. They weren't wasted, though. They were used to make cider. Anyone who owned a cider mill in a rural community was always popular at the apple harvesting time. The apples were tossed into the mill, a slat tub contraption that crushed the fruit. The juice was squeezed out into another tub and mixed with a little sugar and allowed to age a bit. That was all there was to it. In spring, we'd watch for the sap to rise on the sassafras trees. Then it was time to dig up the roots, which were cleaned and boiled until the water turned into a brilliant pink, sweetened with a little sugar. Sassafras tea was considered a tonic that helped rebuild the blood after the long, cold winters. Later in the year, the hillsides were filled with wild huckleberries and blackberries, which were gathered for pies and jellies as well as juices. In fall, we'd search the hillsides for wild grapes, which were also used to make tasty jellies and drinks. Those with little ingenuity could provide themselves with many beverages just by using nature's gifts. We never had to dip into the limited cash supply for these drinks, and they always lifted our spirits. Wow. One of my favorite jobs as a child was to bring home frost fish. It was cod in about the 6-inch range. I often stopped on the way home from school at our fish trap in the river and brought home a bucket full of jumping frost fish. We'd have a really good meal with that fish. Pig potatoes, the small ones that farmers left in the fields, and skim milk the dairy gave us after it was removed from the cream. I guess they'd call that a health food today. Arthur Bradford, Duxbury, Massachusetts. We were living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin during the Depression, and I did baking at home to supplement our income. I got 9 cents for a loaf of bread and 25 cents for an apple cake. I also made a reducing bread and had customers for that from way on the other side of town. I cleared about $65 a month. At the time, my husband was making $1.25 a day at a friend's farm 125 miles away. One day, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, there stood a man who said he was a state inspector. He said, "I understand you're baking and selling food, and as you know, there are restrictions on that." He proceeded to tell me the rules about square footage on floor space, cleanliness, and so forth. I finally told him, "Well, if you take this means of making a living away from me, we'll have to go on relief." The inspector was very understanding, said everything was perfectly sanitary, and promised not to turn me in unless the neighbors complained. I had friendly neighbors, so I guess there was no complaints because I kept baking for another 2.5 years. Edith Peterson, Burbank, California. Hearing the phrase beans, bacon, and gravy reminds me of the butcher in our town who would trim the skin from slabs of bacon and sell them in rolls for 10 cents. Mother used those skins to season everything from greens and beans. Oh, how I remember those beans. The first day we'd have beans. The second day Mother would add water and elbow macaroni to the leftovers. The next day she'd add a can of tomatoes. If there were any left after that, she'd add more water and drop dumplings into it. Seems like we ate beans all week, but they were filling and helped us survive the Depression. Frida Farrell, Suitland, Maryland. I wouldn't want to live through those hard Depression years again, but I'm glad I experienced them. One treat, when we could afford it, was going to the bakery and buying a gunny sack full of baked goods for 25 cents. We never knew what we had until we came home and spread it out all over a clean towel. Each of us would pick out our favorites, bread heels, rolls, or cookie pieces, and ate our goodies with a glass of milk from our cow. The quarter's worth of baked goods lasted us several days. Eve Ernst, Milwaukee, Oregon. We lived on what the good earth gave us during the Depression. We grew our own fruits and vegetables, and our cow provided milk, cream, sour cream, butter, buttermilk, cottage cheese, and curds from my mother's cheese curd pie. Mother was a very good cook, so we never went hungry, even when the food wasn't fancy. I recall many meals made of bread and milk, onion sandwiches or fried egg sandwiches, and we'd had codfish gravy too, when we could afford the quarter for the box of codfish. One of our favorite snacks was bread fried on bacon grease. Can you imagine what they would say today about all the cholesterol we consumed back then? Another good dish was fried salt pork with milk gravy served over homemade bread, biscuits, or mashed potatoes. My mother also made her own tomato soup with home canned tomato juice. It wasn't very thick, but it sure was good. One of my favorite foods from the Depression era was dried corn. Mother would cut the corn off the cob and leave it in a big pan on low heat overnight. The next day she put it in jars. When she wanted to use it later, she soaked it for a while, then cooked it with cream and butter. We butchered 2 pigs every year and rendered the lard for frying, preserving, and baking. The press used to separate the lard from the hot fat left us with brown, crispy cracklings, which were delicious. The hams and bacon were smoked with bark from our hickory tree, and Mother would preserve the ham in a big crock. She fried some ham, put it in the crock, then covered it with a layer of lard. Then she continued layering ham and lard over that until that crock was full. Then the crock was stored in a cold basement for use later. We may not have had anything fancy when we were kids, but what did we have was real and genuine. We knew we were loved and everyone was there for each other. It was a feeling as warm as the feather ticks we slept on. We had a large garden, and we raised our own chickens and rabbits during the Depression. But we did have a favorite spot for dining out when we could afford it, the Barrel in Pendleton, Oregon. It was a drive-in restaurant with fountain service, and there was also booth service for an extra 10 cents. The hours were 6:30 a.m. to 1 a.m. This is what part of the menu looked like in 1936. Breakfast, hamburger steak, 40 cents. Ham or bacon and eggs, toast, potatoes, and coffee, 50 cents. 2 eggs any style, toast, potatoes, and coffee, 35 cents. Hot cakes and coffee, 20 cents. Side of ham or bacon, 15 cents. Milk, coffee, buttermilk, 5 cents. Tea and hot chocolate, 10 cents. T-bone steak, salad, potatoes, toast, and coffee, 75 cents. That was the Barrel special. Now, sandwiches. Juicy pig barbecue, 20 cents. Hamburger, 10 cents. Hamburger deluxe, 15 cents. Cheeseburger, 15 cents. Hot dog, 10 cents. Hot dinner sandwich with potatoes and gravy, 25 cents. Cold ham and potato salad, 20 cents. Fried ham and potato salad, 20 cents. Cold pork with potato salad, 20 cents. Tuna fish, 20 cents. Bacon and tomato, 20 cents. Ham and egg, 25 cents. Cheese, Swiss or American, 15 cents. Lettuce and tomato, 15 cents. Specials, fruit salad, 25 cents. Pineapple and cottage cheese salad, 25 cents. Shrimp salad, 35 cents. Crab salad, 35 cents. Potato salad, 15 cents. Baked bean plate, 25 cents. Macaroni plate, 25 cents. Cold plate lunch, 35 cents. Watermelon on ice, 15 cents. Dorothy Baruch, Chehalis, Washington. It's amazing to see those prices of a menu back in the Depression. And now look at the prices on a menu today in any restaurant. It's amazing, is it not? Wow. It's just absolutely amazing. As children during the 1930s, my sister and I enjoyed the rewards we earned. During summer, we picked fruits and vegetables from our garden and orchard and from the neighbors' orchards for a small fee. My mother would can what we picked using receipts handed down from our grandparents. My job was to retrieve last year's fruit jars from the cellar and wash them in a big tub outside before they were sterilized in the kitchen. Then I'd be sent to the store with my wagon to pick up supplies like sugar and vinegar and spices. Since we lived some distance from the store, the trip took a while, but it was so rewarding to come home to those wonderful fragrances emanating from the kitchen. I could pick up the scent as far as a block away. I'd walk in with my mouth watering, and Mom always handed me a spoon or a bowl to lick. After everything was canned, it was carefully carried to the cellar, and my sister and I always looked forward to the day when we were told to bring up the first home canned goods of the year. Usually a week after the first heavy frost, I can still taste those peaches and pears and pickles and tomatoes, and especially the jellies and preserves spooned onto a piece of warm bread. Our father's trucking business fell off during the Depression, but he occasionally did some hauling for the WPA. We were told that whenever one of the Treasury Department checks arrived, Dad would buy us a quart of ice cream. Our mailbox was about 3 blocks away, but the promise of a treat like that gave us plenty of incentive to check the mail regularly. The taste of that vanilla ice cream covered with strawberry or raspberry preserves is something we've never forgotten. We didn't have much, but we appreciate the small returns we've received in a reward for our labors. We didn't have much during the Depression, but we learned how to get by. During the leanest years, we usually had oatmeal with diluted canned milk for breakfast. I can't remember ever having fresh milk. I guess the canned variety was cheaper. For lunch and dinner, we ate a lot of what Mother called poor man's dish, which consisted of macaroni and tomatoes and some ground beef. Greens were there for the taking in the spring. We often went out to look for dandelions before they bloomed, and then Mother would cook them like spinach, mixing them in with mayonnaise sauce and serving it over potatoes. If she had any bacon, she'd add bits of that too. My parents never complained, nor did they expect anyone to give us anything. The government was giving food away then, but my dad was too proud to take it. I'm happy I lived during that time. It taught me that material things aren't what life's important. The greatest gifts we had were our parents and the example that they set for us, and they taught us that you can accomplish anything if you believe you can and if you work hard enough. Dorothy Ness, Annapolis, Maryland. Okay, guys, that's all for this video. I will see you in the next one. You stay safe. Stay positive. You keep prepping. And as always, fearless.